The only way you can get people to really learn how to engage messy, complex, multi-dimensional problems is to put real, messy, complex, multi-dimensional problems in front of them and get them to work together collaboratively across disciplinary silos and support them as they go through that. That's experiential learning. We run programs that put messy real-world problems at the center and then coordinate, coach, support, guide, and provide content for the individuals going through that process.
Welcome back, everybody. Rich Brubaker, founder of Collective Responsibility, here today with another episode of the Mission Driven Podcast. Through this podcast, I'm reaching out to aspiring mission-driven entrepreneurs, investors, academics, the ecosystem of individuals who see a challenge out in the world and want to leverage the power of entrepreneurialism and innovation to bring solutions at scale towards those. Today, I'm extremely honored to be joined by Jason Blackstock, who is the founder and CEO of How to Change the World Social Enterprise, an organization that empowers and equips students and early career professionals with the skills and mindsets to build a greener, more equitable future. For me, it's a really great time to be talking about this because we really need to be delivering mindsets and tool sets like we're doing over here against this. And I'm a huge fan of education. I spent a lot of time in the classroom myself. So it's great to be talking with a peer, fellow entrepreneur, and someone who's trying to leverage these tools to empower others to change the world. So with that, Jason, thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Richard, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to the chat.
All right. So as a starting point, who are you and what is the mission that you're on?
Richard, thank you. The mission is simple. Empower the current and next generations through exceptional learning experiences and opportunities so that they can make impact in the world. Sounds easy as a mission statement until you actually get into the details. Now, who am I and what's my background that brought me here? For someone who now works in sustainability education globally, I started in quite a different location. I started as a quantum physicist in Silicon Valley, and I love tech. I've been a techie since a child. I know we'll talk in a bit about sort of my motivations and inspirations, but lots of things led me into tech. But what I found when I started working in technology in Silicon Valley is that it was utterly devoid of connection to, the real world. It's technology for technology's sake. And so I found myself migrating from pure tech and building quantum computers and molecular electronics into sustainability, energy technologies, and trying to look at how to bring tech to bear on things that I cared about. And that led me into the climate negotiations, sustainability, and finally back into academia to figure out how we prepare the next generation of students and young professionals to be able to actually build tech that makes a positive impact on the world, and those that are trying to change the world understand how to engage with technologists.
Man, that's a lot. And that leads you obviously eventually to how to change the world. So from there, what is how to change the world, and what is the work that you're doing there to kind of, education, technology for better?
At the core, how to change the world is about mass experiential learning. What I mean is when you think about the challenges that society is facing today, whether it's how do we deal with AI technologies and all the opportunities and problems that creates, or how do we deal with sustainability, environmental or social, these are messy, complex problems. You don't just look up in a textbook, oh, that's what you do. That's what they did before. That's how you solved accounting. But for the type of messy problems we face in the world today, they're complex. They have all these moving pieces, and you can't prepare people to tackle those by getting them to sit exams on things we know from the past. The only way you can get people to really learn how to engage messy, complex, multi-dimensional problems is to put real, messy, complex, multi-dimensional problems in front of them and get them to work together collaboratively across disciplinary silos and support them as they go through that. That's experiential learning. We run programs that put messy real-world problems at the center and then coordinate, coach, support, guide, and provide content for the individuals going through that process.
When did you come up with this? Was it coming out of tech and realizing like they're divorced and so they need a little bit more, say, of an immersion? Or was it going when you went into academia, like, my God, they're too far away as well? Like, what was the kernel or the seed of this? And then how did you kind of get started? Like, what were the early pilots or the early ideas to bring this to the market?
And so I ran a whole bunch of experiments in various environments I'd been involved with long before I launched the first program for how to change the world in academia. And along the way, there were other ones, like at the Kennedy School, they've got a spring exercise that has similar elements to some of the stuff that we ended up building in the mass experiential program at University College London. But when I landed at UCL, so I got asked to come back into academia after spending half a dozen years working that interface in the climate negotiations and sustainability to create a new academic department, because academia knows the old models don't work, but it's unclear what the next new models are, and it's hard to change a system that is that large. And so when I landed there, I had all of these bits of experiences along the way, but they didn't. There was a lot more experimentation to still do at UCL to figure out exactly how to make it land and gel.
I've worked at several schools over my time as well. Some academics, they tell you they really want to change the system, but then academic inertia holds in. It's like, what was your starting point for working with academics and kind of disrupting this model or creating a new model that would then disrupt other systems?
So, Rich, I had one big advantage. The thing that got me to come back into academia was the opportunity to create a new academic department from scratch. And that led to a blank sheet of paper to try some experiments. How to Change the World was one of them, but we also built master's programs that had experiential learning and real world project at the core. We created the first doctorate of public administration, which is a practice-based, real world-based doctorate. So there were a lot of experiments that are still running that now are really successful programs at UCL. So I started with that blank sheet of paper, and then I used up every bit of political capital I had in order to set up the experiments and run them.
When you're going through this, you're building it. How much resistance did you meet to begin with? Or did you find a lot of the professors on campus were actually really excited and drawn to this, like, finally, we have a venue to actually try things ourselves and to grow ourselves? Or was it like, man, you're ruining it for the rest of us?
I guess I would say sort of three things on this. One, I can think of only an incredibly small number of faculty members out there that I know that I've met who are real curmudgeons who say, I don't want the system to change. They exist, there's no question, but that is a tiny fraction. The vast majority of individuals out there are in academia because they want to figure out how they can produce knowledge, share knowledge with the next generations that will really make a positive impact. That being said, the system is not exactly set up to incentivize that. So I guess that's the second point. But third and most importantly, I use this as a bit of a polemic, as a caricature, but it's worth pausing and reflecting on. In order to be a teacher in elementary school, where one of your jobs might be teaching finger painting to kindergarteners, you have to have a 4-year education degree. In order to be a professor of quantum physics, I just had to have a PhD in quantum physics and demonstrate that I knew stuff from research. Zero preparation for how to teach. And so one of the big challenges in higher education generally is people are exposed to how they were taught. And so, and we built it into the name: lecturer, professor, lecture, profess. Like, it's built into the title, this idea that what all you do is you spew the knowledge, and that's enough. People will absorb it and figure it out. But that doesn't actually add up to the mindsets, the knowledge and skills that goes with the knowledge in terms of how to tackle sustainability issues or think about how AI is going to transform the workforce today. Because that stuff they're live, real problems that we're trying to solve, and you need the mindsets and skill sets to solve them, not just the knowledge of how we've dealt with similar situations in the past. And so when I was setting things up, there's a lot of champions within higher ed who really want to see the change, but without the incentives and without the examples and the learning about how to do things differently, it's really hard to fight the system and buck the system, especially with all the pressures and publisher perish tenure, all of that sort of stuff. So yeah.
Whatever your center was supposed to do, you worked on it for a number of years, and then you decided to take over one of those projects and spin it out. What made you decide to take this one out? And how did you, after you left academia with it, did you have a clearer identity, like kind of a clear idea for scalability, who you would sell to, and therefore the business model? Or did you just know that more universities, more educators in general need this work, and therefore we're just going to go and give it a shot?
We launched How to Change the World in 2013-14 as an academic year because several deans had come to me and said, we need a program that will provide real world experiential learning for students from across different disciplines. And we need it to be 1,500 students at the same time. And they like the sustainability thing. So could you do it on that, please? And by 2016, we had cracked the code well enough with the experiments that we ran that first, at that point in time, it became a required capstone course for every engineer, computer science, and business student at UCL. In addition to that, because it was so real world engaged, we started getting visibility from places like the Royal Academy of Engineering, who asked us to do versions of the program for their Young Global Leaders Conference and for other students that then ended up to the National Academies of Engineering, asking us in the US to come over and do a version for their Global Grand Challenge Summit and all the students they had there, which led to other requests from the Global Solutions Summit, and then it was other universities. So by 2018, we already had external partners that had been asking for more and more versions of what we built because it was so unique. But in 2018, my faculty came and lovingly reminded me they had day jobs, and we've got all this research we've got to do, all the incentive structures that aren't aligned. So we can't keep just doing this as a side gig off of the department. And this model of one university doing stuff for all of these other universities, that's not really a model that exists. It made far more sense to look at how do we spin out a social enterprise that allows us to capture the interest that is already there. But when COVID happened, we had all these partner institutions go, could you do one online for us? And we went, let's see, we haven't done that before. And our pilots in 2020 and 21, I was skeptical, but it actually worked better than we could have imagined. We actually got better learning outcomes from the students, better experiences from all of the participants. And we started asking why from a research point of view, and it came down to one thing more than anything else. Each student in an online environment can be exposed to an order of magnitude more diversity. Diversity of other students they work with, diversity of the mentors and teaching team that are engaged in a program, diversity of perspectives, which deepens critical thinking, problem solving, develops the skills and the mindsets far more effectively for working in a global messy world. And so that's when I actually gave up my professorship at UCL and ended up saying, this is where we can really scale. This is where we have the potential to grow programs that will have thousands of students from around the world. But even more importantly, we can provide the template of both how to do it, to train the trainer for faculty, but also we've had to build our own technology for this. So increasingly, it's now not just the train the trainer, but now it's the technology we can provide the universities for coordinating and building programs that provide mass experiential learning on real world problems for their students.
Yeah, so I'd like to understand the process or how you structure immersive real world experience at scale. Like, how do you structure these immersions so there's quality, consistency, and impact? Because I feel like you got to have those three things. So how do you approach that? Because I think a lot of people in our space are trying to figure like how do we scale knowledge, and how do we effectively do train the trainer or T to T? Like it's very difficult. So how do you approach it, and what were some early lessons you learned about how to do it effectively?
Let me deal with quality and consistency first, and then we'll touch on impact separately. When it comes down to quality and consistency, whether we're doing a 3-day intensive or we've run term length multi-university courses with dozens of universities where you have weekly sessions that are highly immersive and engaging. The consistency comes from here is the recipe, here is the outline, you're going to work for these 45 minutes on mapping, doing a systems map of the problem. You're going to work for these 45 minutes on stakeholder analysis. And we make sure there is support for them as they're going through it. There's no lectures. It's all async materials with highly interactive workshops where they're engaging. But then a big trick to doing experiential learning at scale is thinking about, well, you can't replicate one professor 1,000 times and have them working with 1,000 different groups. However, think about how med schools or Navy SEALs or others do it. See one, do one, teach one. C1 is looking at asynchronous materials. Do one is going through the program. Where's the opportunity to teach one? Well, the opportunity is we leverage near peer coaches, mentors. So those who've recently been through these programs in the last year or two, we train up our own teaching team or coaching team that's providing that guidance and support. And so, yes, they're able to support on the tools of systems thinking, the tools of stakeholder analysis, the basic technologies of how you collaborate across all these different remote environments where you're connecting students in from. So the way in which we structure these experiences is we have real world stakeholders who have a real sustainability issue, and we do this as a challenge-based learning. So this is broad. It's solve sustainability for a part of Shanghai. And of course, the students are sitting there going, I'm sorry, what? Where do I start? And we guide them through frameworks that help them take broad, messy, confusing, complex, and structure into, well, as a team, we have unique skills, passions, and knowledge we can use to narrow down on a problem. And there may be 100 teams all working on the same environment, but each team comes up with a different problem, a different framing that they're working on, and they're coached and mentored along the way. And we have real world community members from that environment that can engage online to help them understand how those problems are playing out. So you're seeing how we stack the experience in a way that is ultimately quite scalable based on pedagogies like peer-to-peer and near-peer learning, creating a structured process on a highly unstructured and complex challenge.
Yeah, this is what I've been doing. I mean, I did this in business schools, and I've done it for hackathons, and I had everything from say, 3 days to a month to a full term. My question when it comes to scalability on the side you're doing those, how how many near peer or mentors do you need in your system to make this work? And do they all need to be from that community, or how many are you beaming in? And I found that often I can ask someone once, or maybe once every couple of years, like how do you manage that group of individuals? Are they volunteer? Are they paid? Is it a mix? And why are they helping you deliver this?
So great question. There are different communities that we segment in different ways. We will have half a dozen to a dozen what we call community representatives from any community we engage with. And we will only ever use one challenge location once for one of our programs. But there are lots of communities around the world that all have sustainability challenges. And what they get is this brain trust of brilliant young minds looking at their problems from unique perspectives, defining different angles on their problems, and then developing proposed solutions. So as a knowledge translation exercise of being able to scope a landscape and get a feedback of all sorts of different perspectives, it's hugely valuable. So it is part of an innovation process for local communities tackling sustainability. So that is a quid pro quo partnership arrangement. They get a huge amount of value. We're not charging the communities because this is around sustainability. And so they volunteer a little bit of their time to engage, and they're getting the value from that. We similarly have mentor communities where we have mid-career professionals, senior career professionals who come in for what we call expert studios. And similarly, what they're giving their expertise for a 2.5 hour window, but they're getting access to the brain trust of ideas that's being generated around sustainability, around innovation. And what we get from the feedback from this mentor community, this expert community that we pool, is they get so much value from these small periods in time that they're very happy to volunteer for a boot camp every month or two, because it's only 2.5 hours of their time. Then we get into the question about the near peers and what we call the teaching team. Out of our alumni who go through our program, so our teaching team are paid. This is a more intense process, and so that's but we end up with something like 30% of our alumni sticking up their hands to say, I would like to be a near peer mentor. Great. We only really need about 5 to 10%. And so one of our challenges is actually it creates the growth and the scaling foundations there to have that many who are enthused and interested in carrying on. And it's also part of the ongoing learning. See one, do one, teach one. the teaching part of the process is actually the next step in the understanding and testing how well you really understand the mindsets, the skills, the frameworks that you get to apply. And so we find that they are enthusiastically seeking those opportunities.
What is success for you when it comes to these programs? Like, what are you trying to achieve, and how do you measure it? How do you measure impact kind of from the different stakeholders? And do you find yourself constantly iterating to improve on that, or are you just happy with, like, look, we get them to this level, we're happy, that's somebody else's job afterwards? Like, how do you use the measurements to either improve upon or understand, whether or not you're on mission?
There's basically three layers to how we think about the impact that we're having. First and foremost, and one of the easiest to measure, is the learning outcomes of the participants. It's never easy to measure learning outcomes, but there's lots of well-established educational frameworks for doing that. And so we measure that robustly. Also in terms of the mindset shift, the skills shift. And that leads to the second thing, which is ultimately we're doing this because we want them to go and have impact in the world. It's always tricky to measure longitudinal impact, but we do our best. We have a lot of anecdotal data that supports this isn't just about giving a little bit of skills and sort of a tiny change or a slight acceleration of the change. It's a step function for a lot of people in terms of shifting direction of the career, in terms of seeing new opportunities. We get a lot of engineers and business students who come through and go, oh my God, I never realized I could apply my skills to tackle the social and environmental challenges I see in the world. I'm all in, I'm changing where I'm going next and what I'm doing next and how I'm doing that. And we're always looking at ways we can continue to support and improve both the program itself. So there's lots of feedback mechanisms for tweaking the programs we run, but even more importantly, how we support the community going forward in creating and fostering more engagement. As we start to engage more corporates and the business world, there's all sorts of new opportunities there. But the third area of change is really important, which is how do we change the educational landscape? And that ultimately is about engaging other educators.
You got individuals, you got academics, and you mentioned corporates, three very different groups. Okay, you might have the same platform, but three different products, or multiple ways of attacking them that have their own business models. Are you doing too much? Like, how do you ensure that you're doing all of these at a high quality and have their own business model? Or are you still kind of an iteration phase to figure out which one has the most scale, which one can actually support the scale? Like, how do you view this? Because I feel like it's very easy as an entrepreneur to do too many things, do too much, and try and solve, like, you're going to solve education. Well, then that's a different thing than solving what a corporate innovation department requires. So how do you balance or focus on these products?
The core of what we do goes back to the first thing that I said in terms of the mission, and what we do is how to change the world. Mass experiential learning. That's what we do. We have cracked a bunch of the code for how to deliver mass experiential learning and had to build the technology in order to underpin it. That bit is scalable no matter where you point it at. And it's kind of like saying, Zoom is a technology platform. Did it disrupt education? Yes. Did it disrupt corporate? Yes. What we have at our core is mass experiential learning and the platform to underpin it. And so there, it's a matter of thinking different market segments and which ones. Now, that being said, of course, you have to think about how to penetrate different markets differently and how to make sure that you are actually delivering the value proposition. And so right now, we're growing and scaling in higher education. We were in about 6 countries a year and a bit ago. We're now in over 30 countries. And we have a lot of our partners in higher education who aren't just saying, who say, yes, we want to have the students go through the programs. We want the educator fellowship to train the trainer, but where's your platform? When can we get access to your platform? And we had originally built the platform for us. It wasn't something that we had built for licensing. We're in that growth and development of going, right, who's our first customers in higher ed for using the tech platform so that they're not doing 100 students through our programs, they're doing thousands of their own students through their own programs.
What's driving the interest by higher education? Like what's going on in their ecosystem that's leading to outsourcing essentially the immersive experience for their students?
Our goal is not for them to outsource to us thousands of their students. And we're very clear on that when we have the conversation. They can outsource 100 students to us because we run global programs, and having 100 students from each of 100 universities, great. There's 10,000 students all getting a global virtual mobility experience. We are not going to scale our delivery to doing millions of students a year for just our narrow programs. That's a lot of scaling in a service delivery model. The way in which we make mass experiential learning truly scalable in the long run is to empower and enable those educational providers to be able to do mass experiential learning. So the theory of change is you send us a small number of students and that's your demonstrator. And they're getting a global program that's exceptional. And it'll be hard for you as one university to partner with 100 others, but you can always find 6 or 7 that you can collaborate with in terms of doing the next thing. And so that train the trainer model is highly attractive because it's not just the tip of the spear to outsourcing everything. It's the tip of the spear for them to transform towards being able to do the type of experiential learning that they know they need. And they need the tools and they need the training to get that built-in that capability built into their faculty and their institution. Now, what's driving that? 50 years ago, when you went to universities or colleges, you went because they had a monopoly on high quality knowledge. They were the ones that were the filter, and they curated and provided all the high quality knowledge. In the last 20 years, edX spinning out of MIT and Harvard, Coursera spinning out of Stanford, TED Talks, all the proliferation and commoditization of content has eroded and frankly obliterated the university and college monopoly on high quality content. And so that has been a progressive trend in higher ed for the last 2 decades, and a lot of the pressures we see on universities and colleges in all of the developed world. There are challenges in the UK, Australia, Canada, the US with the public, even where the public's funding it, going, we're not seeing the value anymore. Why are we subsidizing this so much? That has created an existential question for universities of what is their role in society.
I have a bit of a challenge with this. The domain expertise, I will agree, is no longer teaching itself. It's no longer the tools of how to run a room. Like you have to be a domain expert and then learn how to teach, right? And then those that do it really well in the schools that are able to do that at high quality, they're gonna be in a much different category of educational experience overall. The challenge I have with, say, some of the platforms that you mentioned, like Coursera and edX and TEDx and all these, the mean's going down. The availability of content does not equal better content. In part because, I can talk you through how I'm doing this with my son. Like he's 13 years old. Every week I give him 3 videos to watch. This week's it's science of solar, it's civics, like learning the Constitution. Another one is cooking. When I go online and I'm trying to find, say, a pedagogy of, say, like 12 weeks in a row, the exact same content that's additive, it's impossible, man. What I can find is, channels with 1,000 different videos that are all fun. It's edutainment, but there's no depth, there's no robustness, there's no pedagogy, my friend. It's just click, 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 and that we've turned into education. So I feel like there's a risk here that actually we go too far, and that actually universities, they refuse to hold their ground. They just give up because the market says we want something more entertaining. But I think this is also the opportunity for truly great immersions that that I've even been working on. It's like, man, like those are transformative for the students, but how do you build a school off of that? I think is like the question. My question to you though is, how you mentioned that you use sustainability with the provost. Is sustainability the lens through which you're kind of navigating like this tool set, or is it the tool set that you're then trying to back in because you want more people to be sustainably minded? Like what's more important? Like, I mean, I know the mission is sustainability, but how much of that are you teaching versus how much of that's just like we're going to fix problems, and then what you're teaching is that process.
I agree wholeheartedly. The volume of content that is now out there is going up prolifically, but the quality, the average quality of content is not. It is going down. And the question then becomes, how are we teaching the part of the new learning that needs to go on is how do you filter and decipher good knowledge from bad? And part of it is, again, go back to what I was saying about universities. One of the ways you used to do that is just pay to go to university because you're going to trust the subject matter expert or the domain expert who's there. Okay, but are they only accessible through traditional classrooms these days? No, there's all sorts of ways to think about having curators or arbiters of high quality knowledge that does not require someone to stand up and profess for an hour and a half twice a week for 14 weeks in a row. And so getting to the core of what you were saying there, Rich, I agree. There is a critical role for universities in being an arbiter of good quality knowledge that is out there. Again, that doesn't follow the traditional model. That doesn't follow the traditional model of saying, therefore, I'm going to teach in a lecture-based mode with exams in order to test whether or not you know things. There are many other ways. A second point to build off of, and this starts to connect to the broader question. When I think about how to prepare students at any age now to digest the content, identify good quality content, and learn how to, most importantly, apply that content to solve real world problems. Because that's ultimately, yeah, there is a certain intrinsic value in knowledge for knowledge's sake, and I don't want to take away from that. But in the demands that individuals within society are having is, yeah, but I also have problems that I want to solve, whether personally, communally, or globally. And so the problem-based learning approach of saying, we're going to give you problems that are messy and real world, and you're going to have to go to the different content sources and figure out high quality content to help solve that, is a far more powerful modality than we're just going to have one person who tells you what the content is and you do an exam and figure out how to that you actually know the stuff. And so there's a different modality of teaching there. And this gets to the fundamental question. I developed the foundations of mass experiential learning at UCL when building how to change the world there, and we as an organization continue to evolve and develop it in the virtual version, the truly mass and distributed experiential learning approach, because we were motivated to solve sustainability issues. And sustainability issues are a perfect example of the truly wicked, messy, social, environmental, technological, moving parts. You need interdisciplinarity, and there's no textbook solutions out there. You have to take bits and bobs of real world state of the art and figure out how to assemble it in different ways and generate new things as you're trying to solve a problem. And so the mass experiential learning, experiential at its heart, has to be problem-based or challenge-based. It can't be a theoretic case study from the past. That's not experiential anymore. There's lots of reasons why the case study methodology, as powerful as it is still getting people to look backwards, not forwards. And it's figuring out how we replace that with real world problems in ways that get people looking forward and figuring out how to bring knowledge to bear.
Now, that's kind of a final question about your product. When you're doing this, how much do you think about the money that can be made from the products? Does the fee structure, does the business model that supports that product, is that important as part of this process? Or you're just like, look, this is what's needed, this is what the market deserves, and we'll work it out as we do?
At the end of the day, we're still a for-profit company. And so, yes, we do have to think about, and we do want to think about how we do well as a company, as an organization, while doing good. And that's the triple bottom line, the PPP, people, planet, profit, and balancing it. And so that's ingrained in our ethos of thinking about, we don't try and look for a lever that's just going to crank up the profits at the expense of learning outcomes, at the expense of any of the people or any of the impact we're trying to have on the product. But at the end of the day, the education industry right now is a $7 to $8 trillion industry, and that's not going down. With AI tools and everything else, that is just expanding and growing. And even when you think about e-learning tools that are going out there, that's in the hundreds of billions a year and rapidly rising, with a lot of it focused on content and how do you determine good content, AI tools to support learning. But ultimately, we see a huge potential for providing the foundations, the current technologies that are out there to support universities, learning management systems. They're great tools, but they are designed to support the administration of large volumes of students. They're not ultimately designed for the educators. They're not ultimately designed to provide great educational experiences in the same way. And so by focusing on that, we're creating a product that we know has huge scalability in terms of it and huge impact by being scalable. And so we absolutely think about the growth curve in terms of number of users, the growth curve in terms of revenue that goes along with it, but the growth curve of impact as well. We want a unicorn or gigacorn of impact, along with how we grow the revenue of the business.
Well, as you were talking about, like the size and scale of, say, the market for education, I was just thinking also the size, scale, and speed of the challenge that we face when it comes to environment, social, governance, economy. Like you're kind of mapping to both, but I feel like you're really focused on changing education, and then from there you can have the impact to sustainability. But your initial draw-in was actually more sustainability and less education. So I'm curious, like, how do you balance the two now? Like, are you really driven to change the world's environment and make people more, and then we have to change the education system, or are you much more like, God, the education system's so broken, sustainability is a great lens to help people get through this transition?
I guess I see it as a both and. I don't see it as an either or one being more important than the other. From the perspective of, in order to get to the outcome of generations of citizens feeling empowered and capable of tackling the messy social, economic, environmental challenges that we're facing, we must empower them through learning experiences. And so they are one and the same from that point of view. The learning experiences are the only real lever we have in terms of ultimately changing mindsets. And it goes back to inside the corporate, right? You can provide as much content as you want, but content doesn't change behavior. Content doesn't change mindset. Only experiences provide mindset. We happen to take a learning lens on the experience, but ultimately it's just the experience they're going through and curating the experience in a way that is supportive of generating that outcome. So the two are intimately connected, and you can't decouple them. And similarly, when I think about when we point some of the learning experiences around the future of AI and technology, well, you're not going to have a sustainable planet if we don't understand how technology is leveraged and harnessed in order to create sustainable social, environmental, and economic systems for our world.
Couple last questions. One of them actually being around, what are the lessons that you learned through this immersive experience of entrepreneurship that you carry forward and have made you better as an innovator, as an educator, as an entrepreneur?
Entrepreneurship is a whole lot like just having to learn it on your own. There's not there are some interesting accelerator programs. There are some interesting programs, and we benefited from a lot of them. But the pedagogy of experiential learning doesn't underpin most of the programs that are out there, and there isn't the safety rails associated with going through a structured program. And so in that context, that actually relates directly to my main lesson: don't go it alone. Community matters, and community matters in multiple ways. Sure, as sources of support, inspiration, ideas, motivation, but also feedback. And it's one of the things that in really good experiential learning, it's the mechanisms of feedback that you get from a structured community, from a pre-created environment that helps you go through the learning process and the reflections. As an entrepreneur, have your community, have your advisors, have your friends who are willing to give you the time to help you see what you're doing from a different lens. Because if you're going at it alone and you think everything has to come from your own head, you're screwed from the beginning, in my experience. You have to have outside perspectives constantly helping you see things that you as an individual or you even as a small co-founding team will never see on your own.